Claude responded, "My daughter-in-law asked to use my truck for the weekend to move some furniture." My daughter-in-law asked to use my truck for the weekend to move some furniture. Luckend. My daughter-in-law asked to use my truck for the weekend to move some furniture. I said of course, and I told her to take the spare key from the drawer in the mudroom, the one that's been there since I built that house with my own hands in 1988. I went to bed around 9 because I'd told her I had a headache, which was true, though it wasn't the whole truth. The whole truth was that I was 71 years old and tired in the way you get tired when you've been carrying a grief for 3 years that nobody in your family has mentioned out loud in the last year and a half. I fell asleep with the window cracked because I liked the sound of the crickets. Somewhere close to 1 in the morning, I woke up, not because of a dream, not because of my bladder, which usually is the reason these days. Something outside, near the carport, close enough that it had to be someone standing right by the side door. A voice, quiet, careful, the voice of a woman who believes the man inside is dead asleep. I lay still and listened. It was my daughter-in-law, Renata. She was on the phone with someone, and she said, "He already put his name on it. The transfer goes through Monday." I did not move. I lay there in the dark with my hand resting on the quilt my late wife Eleanor made the winter before she passed, and I listened to Renata walk back around toward the driveway, and I heard my truck start, and I heard it pull away down Route 9, and I lay there another full minute before I made myself get up. I walked to the study at the back of the house, past the hallway photos, past the coat rack, to the roll-top desk that had belonged to my father before it was mine. I opened the top drawer. I opened the side drawer where I kept the metal box. I opened the file cabinet in the closet, the one with the papers that mattered. The metal box was gone. In its place was a single sheet of paper, folded in thirds, my name printed across the front in handwriting that wasn't mine and wasn't Renata's either, though I'd come to understand whose it was soon enough. I picked it up. I unfolded it. I read what was written there, standing in my own study at 1 in the morning in my socks, and in about 30 seconds I understood the shape of something that had been built around me for longer than one weekend with a borrowed truck. Then I walked to the kitchen, put the kettle on, sat down at the table, and started making a list. If you're new to this channel, stick around, because this one's going to matter to you. Drop a comment and tell me where you're tuning in from, and let's get into it. My name is Walter Prentice. I'm 71 years old, and I live outside a little town called Cedar Falls, in the hills of western Pennsylvania, in a farmhouse my wife Eleanor and I bought in 1985 for $61,000, back when that number felt like more money than 2 young schoolteachers had any business being trusted with. We paid it off in 2011. Eleanor bought a bottle of sparkling cider because neither of us drank, and we sat on the porch and looked out at the land. 40 acres she'd spent 3 decades, turning into gardens, and a small orchard, and we didn't say much, because after that many years together you don't need to. She passed in 2023, pancreatic cancer, fast once it was found, the kind that gives you 11 weeks instead of a lifetime of warning. We'd been married 44 years. I'm not going to try to explain what that kind of loss does to a man. I'll tell you instead that the apple trees she planted the spring before she got sick bore fruit for the first time this past September. And I stood at the kitchen sink washing the first apples off that tree and had to sit down at the table for a while before I could finish. I spent 36 years teaching high school shop class and driver's ed in the same district, the kind of unglamorous, necessary work where nobody remembers your name unless something you taught them saved their life on a highway one night, and plenty of people have told me over the years that it did. I retired in 2018, 5 years before Eleanor passed, which meant I had 5 good years of retirement with her before I had retirement without her. I don't regret a single day of those 5 years. The years since, I'm still finding my way through, same as anybody would. My son Dennis is 43. He lives about 25 minutes away in a development outside Butler that was a nice place to raise a family 15 years ago and has been quietly fraying at the edges since. Dennis works in what he calls commercial real estate consulting, though the description of what exactly that means has shifted enough times over the years that I've stopped putting much weight on any one version of it. His wife, Renata, is 39. She is pleasant the way certain people are pleasant, warm enough on the surface that you feel it without being able to say exactly what it's made of. She calls me Walter, never Dad, never Pop, always Walter, in the particular careful way some people say a name so it functions as a wall instead of a bridge. My daughter, Susan is 45, older than Dennis, from my first marriage, a short one. I entered too young and exited grateful, though grateful for Susan more than anything. Susan lives in Pittsburgh. She calls every Sunday evening without fail. She has never once asked me for a dime. She came out for 6 days after Eleanor's funeral and reorganized my entire pantry and drove me to 3 doctor's appointments I'd have otherwise skipped, because Susan expresses love by noticing what needs doing and doing it, quietly, without making a production of it. I want you to keep Susan in the back of your mind while I tell you the rest of this, because she matters. She matters more than almost anything in this story, though that part comes later. Dennis had been good to me. I want to say that honestly, because fairness requires it. In the year and a half since Eleanor died, he'd called often, visited on weekends sometimes, brought groceries a few times when I was low. He'd offered to help me sort through Eleanor's financial paperwork, which had felt like drowning to me in those early months, and I'd taken him up on it gratefully. Not legal authority. Not signing power. Just access. The kind that comes from a grieving man at his own kitchen table saying, "Son, I don't know where your mother kept the deed to the back 40. Can you help me find it?" And, in helping me find it, he learned the layout of everything I had, not all at once, but the way water finds every low place in a field over enough seasons of rain. I didn't see it happening, while it was happening. I was 69 and grieving and grateful to have a son who showed up, and the showing up was real enough that whatever it was covering didn't come into focus until a Saturday night when a tired old man went to bed early and woke at 1 in the morning to a voice by the carport. The transfer goes through Monday. Let me tell you what was in that metal box, and what that note said, and why 5 words heard through a screen window in the dark turned out to be the most honest thing anybody in my family had said to me in 3 years. The box was the one Eleanor had always called the important box, plain steel, a little dented on one corner from a move back in '92. She'd kept it with a precision I understand now as a kindness she was giving me ahead of time, for the day I'd need it and she wouldn't be there to hand it to me. Inside it lived the deed to the farmhouse and the 40 acres, my pension paperwork, the will we'd updated together in 2019 after her mother passed, the trust Eleanor had set up for her own side of the family's assets, and a smaller envelope inside the box, a manila one, holding the paperwork for a joint account she and I had built over 18 years of careful saving from 2 teachers' salaries that most people assume don't add up to much, which, at the last statement, stood at $387,000. He already put his name on it. The transfer goes through Monday. My son had taken the box, and somewhere in what it held, he'd found or manufactured something that let him believe he had authority over an account that was not his to touch. I sat at my kitchen table at 1:30 in the morning with the kettle cooling and a yellow legal pad in front of me, and I wrote it all down in order, the way 36 years of teaching kids to check their mirrors before they moved had made automatic in me. What I had, what was missing, what I'd heard, what I didn't know yet, the whole shape of what I was up against. By 3 in the morning, I had a list. By 4, I knew exactly who I was calling when the sun came up. If you're still with me, hit that like button, because what I found inside that folded note when I finally read it all the way through was worse than what I'd understood standing by the carport. And what I did next is the reason I'm sitting here telling you this story instead of a different one. I didn't sleep again after 4. I made coffee properly around 6, sat with my list, and waited for a decent hour to make a call. At 8:15, I dialed a woman named Corinne Whitfield, whose office sat above the hardware store on Main Street in Cedar Falls, recommended to me 2 years back by a fellow retired teacher who'd used her when his brother tried something similar with their late mother's farm. My friend had told me Corinne doesn't let things slide past her, which was exactly the quality I needed at 8:15 that morning. She picked up her own phone. I told her what I'd heard through the window. I told her about the box. I told her about the note, which I hadn't told you about yet, because I wanted you to hear it in the order I lived it, without skipping ahead to the part that made my stomach drop. I like this. The note read, in handwriting I'd later learn belonged to a notary who'd never once met me. Gad, by the time you find this, the account's already set up, and the paperwork's filed. This is the easiest way to protect what's left before the market does something we can't undo. We'll talk when you're ready. The paperwork's filed. I had not signed any paperwork. I had not been shown any paperwork. Nobody had sat me down and asked me anything. Corinne went quiet on the other end of the line for a moment after I read her those lines. Then she said, in the voice of a woman who's heard plenty in her career and knows right away when something's serious, "Mr. Prentice, don't go near that bank today. Don't call Dennis today. Don't sign one single thing today, no matter who hands it to you or what reason they give you. Can you be in my office at 10? I was there at 9:35. She was already at her desk with a legal pad and a pen, looking at me with the kind of focused attention of someone who understood that a Monday deadline meant the clock actually mattered here. "Tell me everything," she said. "From the start. Not last night. The actual start." I told her from the start. Eleanor, the box, the year and a half after the funeral, Dennis's helpfulness, and what that helpfulness had let him learn. The truck, the borrowed truck, the one in the morning, the 5 words. Corinne wrote while I talked. When I finished, she set her pen down. "In Pennsylvania," she said, "a valid power of attorney needs your actual wet signature, witnessed properly, and in most cases notarized. It can't just appear because somebody said it did. If Dennis presented something to a bank with your name on it, either he forged that signature, someone helped him forge it, or he got a signature from you under conditions you didn't fully understand." She paused. "Is there anything you signed in the last year that you didn't read all the way through?" I thought about it, and there was one thing. Back in the spring, Dennis had brought over some papers he said were related to updating beneficiaries on one of Eleanor's old accounts, something the bank supposedly required to finish closing out her estate. He'd laid 3 pages on my kitchen table and pointed to the lines, and I'd signed where he pointed because he was my son, because the estate paperwork had already been a mountain, and because I'd been tired in that particular bone-deep way that comes from missing your wife of 44 years. I hadn't read it. I told Corinne this. She wrote it down and underlined it twice. "I need those pages," she said. I didn't have copies. Dennis had taken the originals. Said the bank required them. "All right," Corinne said. "Here's what happens. I file an emergency motion this morning to freeze any transfer activity tied to a power of attorney we believe is forged or fraudulently obtained. That's in front of a judge before noon. At the same time, I contact the bank directly and put them on notice that the document they're holding is under dispute, and any transaction made under its authority is subject to being reversed. I need you to call me the moment Dennis reaches out, which he will, because once the bank gets my letter, he'll know something's already moving." She looked at me steadily. "Are you ready for this to get serious?" I thought about that voice by the carport. "The transfer goes through Monday." "It's already serious," I said. "I'm just the last one in the room." "Who found out?" Corinne nodded once. "Then, let's make sure you're the first one in the room when it's over." She had the motion filed by 11:20. I know because she texted me the confirmation number while I sat in my truck, back in my driveway by then. Renata having returned it sometime that morning while I was at Corinne's office too rattled to drive it anywhere. Not ready to go back inside the house where the box was still missing from the closet. Dennis called at 12:50. I let it ring once, then answered, because Corinne had told me to pick up and say as little as I could while letting him talk. "Hey, Dad." His voice had the careful warmth of a man who'd been rehearsing his tone in the car. "Dennis," I said. "Just checking in. How you feeling today?" "Fine," I said. A pause. He'd expected more out of that word. He'd expected, I think, a man who hadn't found the note yet, or a man who'd found it and was confused and needed things explained to him gently. What he got instead was the particular quiet of a man who knew exactly what had happened and had already spent his morning in a lawyer's office above the hardware store. "Listen," Dennis said. "I wanted to talk to you about something. Renata and I have been thinking about your finances, just from a planning standpoint, and there's something I want to walk you through. Could I come by this afternoon?" "Not today," I said. A longer pause. "Tomorrow, maybe?" "Great. I'll let you know," I said. A silence that said more than anything either of us had spoken aloud. "Okay," he said. "Talk soon." I hung up and called Corinne and told her what he'd said. She said good, and told me not to schedule anything until she heard back from the bank. The bank called Corinne at 2:30. The power of attorney had been presented 4 days earlier, not the night Renata borrowed the truck, 4 days before that, which meant the truck had nothing to do with how they'd gotten the box. The box had been taken on an earlier visit, one I needed to sit with for a minute. The previous Wednesday, Dennis had stopped by, said it was just a casual visit, brought me a sandwich from the deli in town, stayed about 2 hours. At some point, I'd walked him out back to show him the apple trees, Eleanor's trees, the ones that had finally borne fruit that fall, the first harvest she never got to see. We'd been out there maybe 20 minutes. He'd been inside the house alone for 20 minutes. The power of attorney had my signature on the principal line. Dennis's name sat on the agent line, a notary stamp from a notary service 2 towns over, dated 9 days prior. 9 days before, I had not left Cedar Falls. 9 days before, I'd been standing in my own orchard with my son, showing him apples his mother would never taste. The signature was a forgery. Corinne said it plainly, not as a theory still being tested. "We can have it examined properly," she said, "but the timeline makes the examination mostly a formality. You've never been anywhere near that notary's office. That stamp is sitting on a document you never signed. That's forgery, Mr. Prentice. And in this state, that's a felony." I sat in my truck in my own driveway and just breathed for a minute. Then I asked her, "What did he open?" Corinne told me. The account Renata had mentioned by the carport, the one already set up, was a new joint account at a different bank, entirely from the ones that held the rest of my money. Dennis had used the forged power of attorney to open it in both our names, himself as the controlling party. Nothing had been moved into it yet. Then as on the 4-7-2, the power of attorney gave him legal cover to transfer funds out of my existing accounts and into the new one, and from there, wherever he chose, he'd built the machine. He hadn't pulled the switch. Corinne's motion had reached the bank ahead of that switch being pulled by roughly 14 hours. I sat with that number for a long while. 14 hours. If I hadn't woken up, if I'd slept through it and called Dennis in the morning and said, "Son, there's a strange note in my desk," and let him come sit at my table and explain it all away in that same rehearsed warm voice. 14 hours. Hit that like button, because we're getting to the part where the machine he built gets pointed at something he never designed it to survive. Corinne filed the criminal complaint with the county sheriff's office the following Thursday, 5 days after her emergency motion. By then she had, in a folder on her desk, a forensic handwriting comparison from a certified examiner, matched against verified samples of my actual signature from my pension paperwork, showing 16 distinct measurable points of inconsistency. A timeline proving the notary stamp, dated the day I was supposedly in that office, couldn't have happened, backed by my phone records and a receipt from the feed store in town, placing me 12 miles from that notary at the exact hour in question. Bank records confirming the joint account was opened without my presence or authorization, and the recording, which I hadn't mentioned yet, because some things belong in the order they actually happened. The recording. On the Thursday morning after that Saturday night, after the list, after Corinne, after sitting in the driveway learning about the account that was already open, I'd done one more thing before I went back inside my house. I drove into town to the electronics counter at the hardware store, the same place I'd bought batteries for years, and I bought a small digital voice recorder. I clipped it inside my shirt pocket, went home, and waited. Dennis came on Sunday. I hadn't invited him, but I hadn't told him to stay away either, and he showed up around 11 with a box of donuts from the bakery on Main he knew I favored, which is the kind of thoughtfulness that's harder to hold against a person than open hostility would be. And I suspect that was exactly the calculation. We sat at the kitchen table. He poured the coffee with the ease of a man perfectly at home in a kitchen he didn't own, which I noticed and said nothing about. He talked for a while about nothing much, the way people do when they're working up to something and need the ordinary conversation to set the temperature of the room first. Then he said, "Dad, I wanted to explain about the account." "All right," I said. I know finding that note probably felt strange, but honestly, Renata and I have been worried about you, financially. The market's been shaky, and your money isn't set up in a way that protects you if things drop. I thought if we had something set up together, it'd give us both visibility and give you a layer of protection. Protection. He was describing access to my money as protection for me. "I see," I said. "The power of attorney, the one with my signature on it." He looked at me. Something in his face shifted, just a degree, toward uncertainty. "Right," he said. "You signed that back in the spring, remember, with the beneficiary paperwork after Mom?" "I remember the beneficiary paperwork," I said. "I don't remember a power of attorney." "I remember. It was in the stack," Dennis said, his voice steady on the surface, though something underneath it wasn't. "You might not have caught every page. There was a lot of paper that day. There was, I said. I've been thinking about that. I've also been thinking about last Wednesday when you came by, and we walked out to look at your mother's apple trees, and you were inside alone for about 20 minutes. Dennis went quiet. And I've been thinking about a notary 2 towns over, I said, whose stamp is sitting on a document dated a day I was standing at the feed store 12 miles from that office, which my phone and my receipt can both confirm. The kitchen went very still. Dennis looked at his coffee. He looked at the table. He looked at me. Dad, he started. Ha. Ha. I also want you to know, I said, that I filed an emergency motion on Monday morning to freeze any transfer on the new account, and that a criminal complaint for forgery was filed with the sheriff's office on Thursday, and that Corinne Whitfield above the hardware store has a folder on her desk with a forensic handwriting comparison showing 16 specific points where that signature doesn't match mine. Dennis didn't say anything. I need you to understand something, I said. I'm not telling you this to punish you. I'm telling you so you understand exactly where things stand before you decide what comes out of your mouth next. Because what gets said at this table in the next few minutes isn't going to matter legally. Corinne handles that part. But between a father and his son, what's said here and what isn't is something the two of us are going to carry a long time. 2. Dennis sat with that for a long stretch. The donut box sat open between us, untouched. The coffee went cold. Out the kitchen window, you could see the orchard, Eleanor's trees, heavy with that first crop of apples, the ones Dennis had stood beside a week earlier, while the box sat, unguarded, in the house, behind him. He put his face in his hands. It wasn't a performance. I've learned to tell the difference over the years, watching hundreds of teenagers try to talk their way out of things in a classroom. This was a man hitting the actual bottom of something and finding it harder than he'd expected. He stayed like that a while. I didn't say a word. I let the silence do whatever it needed to do. When he finally looked up, his face had done something I hadn't seen since he was a boy, not since long before he learned how to keep those moments hidden behind something sturdier. I am in so much trouble, Dad, he said. I know, I said. The real estate thing, he said. It's been bleeding money for almost 2 years. I owe more than I've got coming in. I've been shuffling things around, trying to keep it from falling apart completely, and I thought if I could get into your accounts, I could bridge the gap long enough to get stable again, pay it all back before you ever knew. That's not a bridge, son, I said. That's a hole you were planning to hide from me until it swallowed something. I know that now, he said. Dennis. My voice was steady, and I want you to understand it was steady not because I felt nothing, but because I'd spent 2 weeks becoming a man who feels things carefully instead of all at once, and that discipline was still holding. You forged my signature on a legal document. You took that box out of my house. You opened an account in my name without my knowledge. Those aren't things you fix by paying a debt back quietly. Those are the kind of things that change what comes next, permanently. End quote. He nodded, hands flat on the table. Corinne handles what happens next legally, I said. That stopped being mine to control the moment I filed that complaint, and I'm going to let it be whatever it's going to be. What I do have a say in is this kitchen, right now. And what I want to say in this kitchen is that I love you the way that doesn't stop, the same way your mother loved you, and that love is going to be here, on the other side of whatever comes. But I am not going to sit here and tell you it's all right, because it isn't. And your mother and I raised you better than to need me to pretend otherwise. Oh, guess. 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 He was crying by then, real tears, the kind that don't perform for anybody. And I sat across from my 43-year-old son and let him cry. Because some things have to be felt all the way through before a person can learn a single thing from them. When he finally wiped his face with the back of his hand, he looked at me with the tired, open look of a man who's set down something heavy he'd been carrying too long. What do I do? He said. You call your own lawyer, I said. Today, before anything else. And you're honest with them, all the way honest. Whatever Corinne's office needs from you to cooperate with this, you give it to them. And you start telling Renata the truth about how bad it actually is. The real version, not the managed one. She deserves that, and so do you. He nodded. The account, I said. The new one. It gets closed. Today, if we can manage it. Yes, he said. And the box? I said. Everything that was in it comes back to me, exactly as it was. Yes, he said. We sat a while longer after that. Neither of us touched a donut. The coffee sat cold in both cups. Out past the glass, the apple trees kept doing what apple trees do in late fall, holding on to the last of a harvest, patient in the cooling air. I thought about Eleanor putting those saplings in the ground, the spring before the diagnosis, the specific quiet faith it takes to plant something you might not live to taste. She hadn't lived to taste it. But she'd planted it anyway, and it had borne fruit, and it was still out there, still holding. Dennis left around one. He had his own lawyer's number written on a slip of paper Corinne had given me from her list of attorneys she trusted to handle the other side of these things honestly. Because even now, even after all of it, I wasn't interested in seeing my son destroyed. I watched from the kitchen window as he sat in his car in the driveway for almost 20 minutes, with the phone against his ear before he finally pulled away. I called Susan. She picked up on the second ring, the way she always does. "Dad, what's wrong?" she said, before I'd gotten past her name, because Susan has her mother's exact same instinct for reading a room clean through a phone line. I told her everything, start to finish. She stayed quiet through most of it, the particular quiet of someone listening completely instead of waiting for her turn to talk. When I finished, she asked, "Are you okay?" "I am," I said, "or I will be." "I'm driving out tonight," she said. "You don't have to do that." "I'm driving out tonight," she said again, with that same, gentle, immovable firmness her mother used to carry, the one I never once won an argument against in either of the two women who've turned it on me over the years. She showed up at my door around 8 with a duffel bag over one shoulder and a casserole dish from a place near her apartment she knew I liked, and she carried it straight into the kitchen and set it on the stove and looked at me the way her mother used to look at me when she wanted to see for herself whether something was actually true. "You look wrung out," she said. "I am wrung out," I said. "All right," she said. "Sit down." We ate at the kitchen table, out of Eleanor's good dishes, and talked until nearly 11, not about Dennis, mostly, but about other things. The apple harvest, a book Susan was halfway through, a former colleague of mine who'd called out of nowhere last month, and who we both agreed I ought to phone back. The ordinary things, the kind that remind you there's a whole life running on both sides of whatever's just happened to you. A before and an after, and the after is still a life worth living. At one point Susan set her fork down and said quietly, "Mom would have been furious." "Yes," I said. "And then she'd have asked what Dennis needed," Susan said. "Yes," I said. "In that order." Susan smiled, small but real. "I got that from her too," she said. "The furious, first part. It's a good quality," I said, "in the right amount." We washed the dishes together at the sink after, the way you do, with someone you've washed dishes beside for years. No discussion needed. One washing and one drying. When we finished, Susan dried her hands on the towel and said, "I'm setting you up a real system for your important papers. Copies in 2 places, and I'm going to know both of them, and you're going to know both of them, and whatever happened to that box is never happening again." "All right," I said. "And I'm calling you Wednesdays too," she said, "not just Sundays." I looked at my daughter, 45 years old, standing in her mother's kitchen with a dish towel in her hands, already making plans with that same practical, unasked-for love, the kind that shows up and finds the thing that needs doing and just does it. "You don't have to do all that," I said. "I know I don't," she said. "That's why it counts." I thought about that later, lying in bed with the window cracked, the crickets going, the house quiet, Susan asleep down the hall, in the room that used to be hers. I thought about the difference between love that costs a person something and love that costs nothing, and which kind you can actually lean your weight on when the transfer's already set to go through Monday and the box is missing from the closet. Some things you learn from 5 words carried through a screen window at 1 in the morning. Some things you learn from a daughter who drives 2 hours with a casserole and stays until every dish is dry and makes plans nobody asked her to make. Those aren't the same lesson. But they come from the same place, which is paying attention to what's actually being built around you while you're busy going to bed early and trusting whoever bothers to show up. I'm paying attention now. The investigation is still open. Corinne tells me Dennis's attorney has been cooperating fully, which she says is about the best outcome anybody in my position could hope for at this stage. And I'm not going to sit here and guess at things I don't control. What I will tell you is that the new box is kept in two places now, one in my study and one in Susan's apartment in Pittsburgh, and both of us know exactly where both of them are. The joint account got closed inside of 48 hours of that Sunday conversation. The forged power of attorney was formally revoked and filed with the county. I sat down with Corinne and drew up a new will, not out of anger, but out of accuracy, reflecting what I actually want instead of what got written back in 2019. Before a Saturday night taught me what 5 words through a window can reveal about the shape of the life going on around you. Eleanor's apple trees are still out past the kitchen window. I look at them most mornings with my coffee. They don't know what happened in the house behind them that fall. They're just doing exactly what she planted them to do, bearing fruit, coming back every season, being precisely what they were built to be. I'm doing the same. 71 years old, retired shop teacher, widower, father of 2, a man who woke up at 1 in the morning and made a list and called a lawyer and ate casserole with his daughter off his late wife's good dishes. That's the honest version. That's what actually happened. And after 36 years of teaching kids how to drive, I can tell you, the honest version is the only one that ever really matters. Things hold, or they don't. I held. If this one stuck with you, drop a comment below and tell me one word for what you felt when Corinne said that motion beat him to the bank by 14 hours. Hit that like button, subscribe if you haven't already, and I'll see you in the next one. And if somebody in your life has been learning the layout of your house by getting let in often enough to find every room in it, trust what you're noticing. Make the list, call the lawyer, and ask yourself what your own son or daughter did with those 20 minutes while you were standing out back, showing them something that still hasn't stopped growing. Claude responded, "The people who truly love you rarely announce it. They just show up with soup, wash the dishes, and call twice a week without being asked. The people who truly love you rarely announce it. They just show up with soup, wash the dishes, and call twice a week without being asked. Trust isn't broken by asking honest questions. It's protected by them. Pay attention to who shows up quietly. Keep your important papers where more than one person you trust can find them, and let love that costs something remind you what love is actually worth." A small note for you. This story was written and fictionalized by AI for entertainment purposes, while hoping to share a genuine, positive life lesson with you.